This is Clear Politics. Hello, Detroit is the heart of the country. That's what they used to say about what was once the grand motor city of the USA. America's industrial flagship, the automotive capital of the world. All of that disappeared in just a few decades.
Today, its streets look like this.
From greatness to the largest bankrupt city in history, Detroit's fate and that of other fallen towns. Let's break it down in Clear Politics. We provide only the facts. You draw the conclusions. Let's start our program with the arsenal of democracy. Yes, that was Detroit's nickname during World War II. Every third military shell was made here. Home to three giant automakers, General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford. In the mid-20th century, Detroit competed with New York and Chicago for economic leadership.
By the mid-50s, Detroit experienced a real industrial boom. Factories, overpasses, interchanges, shopping centers. But the seeds of disaster were already sown. Public transport wasn't developed in the city. The auto lobby and government thought it wasn't needed.
Living in Detroit was quite difficult. There was almost no urban environment. Wealthy engineers and middle-class workers started leaving the city or moving to the suburbs at the first opportunity. The poorest residents were the ones left in Detroit. Crime gradually increased and racial clashes began. In July 1967, Detroit saw mass riots between police and the black population. The National Guard was brought in, and 43 people died in the riots.
And that wasn't all. Then came the oil crisis in '73. It was called the Energy Pearl Harbor.
On October 17, 1973, Arab countries declared an oil embargo on the U.S. and its allies. This event triggered the first major energy crisis in history, which was a real shock for the West.
The reason is simple. The U.S. supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War, so Arab countries banned oil shipments to America. 90% of the American market depended on this black gold.
Detroit became a point of extreme concentration for the auto industry. Of course, when both production and retail models started to change, manufacturing began moving outside the U.S. simply because it was getting more and more expensive to produce even for the domestic market. And Detroit started to decline. The city's catastrophe was a mix of economic and political administrative factors.
That same auto triumvirate lost billions of dollars. Mass layoffs began in Detroit.
And there was racial segregation, too. Factories laid off black workers first. Unemployed African Americans rioted and attacked white neighborhoods. By the 1980s, they had effectively taken control in Detroit.
Detroit hit its crime peak in 1991. Nearly 3,000 crimes were committed daily per 100,000 people. That's Latin American levels. At its peak, the Motor City had almost 2 million residents. by 2013's 680,000.
Detroit was officially declared bankrupt. This is the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history, threatening cuts to pensions and benefits. Even selling masterpieces from the local gallery wasn't ruled out. A judge said Detroit's debt was $18.5 billion. Half of that is owed to social services and health care.
At that time, the city was run by Mayor David Bing. His rescue plan for the city was fantastic: demolish a quarter of all buildings and concentrate the population in a few areas. Today, Detroit has one of the highest unemployment and crime rates in the U.S.
Since 2000, the city's population has dropped by more than 250,000. Now, Detroit's unemployment rate is over 18%. At least 70,000 homes and lots in the city are abandoned. About 40% of streets have no lighting. The violent crime rate is 3 times the national average.
Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs, either at auto plants, in services supporting those plants, or in contracting organizations. This led on one hand to a mass exodus from the city, and on the other, those who couldn't afford to leave. They ended up in tough conditions, and crime started to rise. Detroit is still one of the most depressed cities in the U.S.
We've already talked about how rats took over Birmingham. Let's look at the root causes. Because the industrial capital, but now in the UK, is also officially bankrupt.
On September 5th, 2023, Birmingham City Council announced a budget deficit of £87 million. Authorities said they couldn't pay public employees or meet their financial obligations.
The main reason for bankruptcy was legal costs from a lawsuit by unions who accused the authorities of paying women in female-dominated jobs less than men. Jobs like caregivers and teaching assistants were mentioned. The city paid compensation for 10 years, but the bills are growing by £5 to £14 million a month. The total unpaid compensation is now estimated at £650 to £760 million. The city simply doesn't have that kind of money, officials say.
Birmingham's bankruptcy is shocking, since it's the UK's second largest city. Population just over 2 million. Notably, it had the most bloated bureaucracy. The local council is the largest in Western Europe.
Definitely yes, an oversized administrative apparatus, unclear and inflated spending. All of this led to bankruptcy, uncollected garbage, in the sense that even cities smaller than Birmingham, like Manchester, are better off. Even Leeds or other cities might be more important politically and economically than the second largest city by population.
Another reason for the disaster was a failed IT transition. Birmingham's authorities wanted to implement a digital ecosystem in the city. It didn't work out. The blame lies with the American ERP system, Oracle. It's used for industrial accounting.
According to the Register, a huge part of the blame lies with Oracle, which had a joint ERP project with Birmingham's authorities that turned into a financial nightmare for the city. The project was initially priced at £20 million, but over time the budget ballooned to nearly £100 million. The project was never completed.
This crisis continues, with the garbage strike dragging on for months. Clearly, some problems remain and are long-term. The last hope is to appeal to the federal budget, since the city has no money of its own. It's hard to imagine, and Labour under Keir Starmer probably wouldn't want headlines about saving the second city from bankruptcy with federal funds. Other cities might ask, Why should we pay out of our own pockets for a city that's been mismanaged for decades?
City authorities froze all spending except for welfare and sickness benefits. Building schools, hospitals, street improvements, and other essentials, maybe next time. Those were cut too, including garbage collectors' salaries, so they just stopped working.
As a result, the city started turning into a dump. Tens of thousands of tons of garbage piled up on the streets of one of Britain's biggest cities. The Daily Mail called it an environmental disaster in the spring, and rats, the new masters of the city. Rat catcher William Timms said there will be even more rodents. They feed on the protein in human food waste, and in this environment, they breed extremely fast. The country's health minister said the strike is out of control.
Hello and welcome to England's second largest city. This is what you see when you enter Birmingham. The garbage strike has been going on for 2 months, and today the union is holding emergency talks with the council to try to end the nightmare for many residents. As you can see from the piles of trash, look, this pile is taller than me, over 6 feet high. Everywhere we've been since entering the city from the train station, there are piles like this on most street corners. The place stinks. And of course, there's a rat problem. I don't know if you can see, but you get the idea. This hole in the garbage bag was made by a rat. There are holes everywhere. Trash has been lying around for almost 2 months, and no one is doing anything. Birmingham's garbage collectors are staging one of the toughest strikes, poisoning the whole city. It's not just about pay, but also a conflict with city authorities, who effectively declared bankruptcy back in 2023. Since then, the city has been run by government advisors looking to save money everywhere, including by cutting staff and leveling or reducing pay regardless of experience.
Bankruptcy, like money, has its own smell. While the city drowned in trash, journalists called it garbage done. Shocked residents were even afraid to let their kids outside. Now you have to stand at the dump.
They're overflowing, mate. I got here early, but the problem is you have to book a slot to get in. I call the number, but they say all the slots are booked, so I can't even throw out my own carpet. I can't believe how bad it is.
It's terrible for the kids. I'm afraid for my children and their health. I'm scared to leave the door open because of the smell.
It's really bad. I take a day off work to come to the dump and throw out trash because the council can't come and collect it.
On November 30th, 2023, another British city, Nottingham, declared bankruptcy. The reason? Officials' mistakes that led to the collapse of energy companies.
According to city authorities, bankruptcy was sped up by unaffordable welfare payments, inflation, and a huge number of homeless people. But the main reason was the failure of the Enviro Energy project, launched in 2020 and shut down just months later.
Nottingham cut all spending to a minimum, and some councillors even blamed London for the problems. Others, though, didn't want to attack the government. Here's a British press article from 2023.
3 Nottingham councillors issued a joint statement blaming the UK government for the city's worsening finances. Local council head David Mellon said he wouldn't resign or close the new £10 million library that opened on November 28th. He said that his main goal now is to keep jobs and continue paying the bills.
Of course, the library was closed and the jobs were not saved. At the end of 2024, the city budget deficit reached £172 million.
The government apparatus itself is basically starting to just feed off what was created before, with nothing new being made. It's a bad situation. On one hand, you have a clearly collapsing municipal and higher-level city administration that can't function. There are no industries that would attract people from other cities to move here. And as property prices have dropped because there's no demand, people move in who can only afford to buy real estate here, or their acquaintances. This, of course, increases the influx of migrants and the crime rate, so we end up with a really bad situation.
Nottingham got so carried away with its environmental agenda that its accounts were left empty, leading to financial collapse.
Back in 2014, Nottingham bought 50 electric buses. They happily reported savings of €10,500 per bus per year on fuel and maintenance. Then they decided to create an energy company, Enviro Energy, which was supposed to get electricity from burning city waste and charge those electric buses. They claimed an additional 40% reduction in CO2 emissions compared to regular diesel buses. But apparently, they forgot to count how much CO2 is released when burning waste. And the waste itself needs to be processed first, which also costs money. Basically, the project worked only as long as the EU kept funding it. Then more waves of migrants arrived, and the city budget had to cover their needs again.
Nottingham and Birmingham are far from all of Britain's problems. Bloomberg writes that most city councils in British cities have confirmed they could go bankrupt within the next 5 years. Of those, 10% said they expect bankruptcy in the current financial year.
The City Hall's financial crisis is due to central government spending cuts, risky investments, and high inflation, all of which have increased municipal debt.
Another bankrupt city made in the USA is Stockton. Before Detroit, it was the classic example of bankruptcy. When property prices 130 kilometers from San Francisco fell by 75%, the economy couldn't handle the debt taken on during the construction boom. In 2012, Stockton declared itself insolvent. Debt: $1 billion, all because of the 2008 mortgage bubble.
Stockton's financial situation began to worsen in 2008 when the crisis hit the real estate market, writes the San Francisco Chronicle. The administration began talks with creditors in March 2012. They continued until June 25th.
The local police were basically disbanded, and the fire department was cut by a third. The city quickly became one of the 10 most dangerous and least literate cities in the U.S., and was even called the most miserable city in America.
By the way, Stockton is the only example where the city managed to recover a bit. In 2013, a U.S. federal court granted the city protection from creditors. By the judge's decision, Stockton could freeze its assets and not pay its debts. A few years later, the peak of the crisis was overcome.
The city even won several awards as the friendliest and most inclusive city in the U.S. in 2017 and 2018. Did that solve its economic problems?
Sadly, no. Stockton was one of the first cities in U.S. history to officially declare bankruptcy, even before Detroit. It's located in California. There are a lot of problems there typical for California. There's rising crime, homelessness, drug trafficking, and so on. I think there have been a lot of reforms in recent years to restore it, like in Oakland and other troubled California cities, but honestly, I haven't seen much real improvement lately.
Sometimes cities go bankrupt for very interesting reasons. Vallejo in California went bankrupt because of the high salaries of local firefighters and police. They cost the city almost 80% of its revenue.
A significant number of municipal bankruptcies in Europe are in Italy. The municipal bankruptcy law was introduced there in 1989 amid growing local budget deficits. From 1989 to 2011, 448 municipalities used this procedure. Some cities even declared default twice in that time. The small city of Toronto, the center of the province of the same name in southern Italy, went bankrupt in 2006 with debts of €637 million.
There are actually many more bankrupt cities. We've just picked the biggest and most notable examples. But did you know that Rome was on the brink of financial collapse several times? It was saved by all of Europe, literally. Notice, in all these failures, it's the local or federal authorities to blame, not business or workers, but the state itself, which in the US and UK never really cared about ordinary people, always preferring to cut, slash, and reduce rather than support and help in tough times. I hope that's clear now. Goodbye.